As promised, following Mastering Church Finance Part 1, this is Part number 2. Hello, this is Steve Googe welcoming you to Church Administration 201. Now, what should you expect to learn during this session? Well, we will clarify several borrowing philosophies that several churches have engaged in the past. They're different philosophies. We will learn about borrowing issues, some issues we should be aware of. We will talk about the budgeting process, and then we will talk about seeking commitment from the members to underwrite the church budget. Now, let's get started. Borrowing money is a significant decision for any church. Here are 4 philosophies churches often use. This philosophy is the never borrow church, or it's also known as the debt-averse philosophy. Some churches believe that borrowing money should be avoided as much as possible, based upon scriptures such as Romans 13:8, which says, "Owe no one anything except to love one another," close quote. Or Proverbs 22:7, which says, I quote, "The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender," close quote. These churches prioritize saving money, fundraising, and trusting God for provision rather than taking out loans. They may only borrow in extreme cases, or not at all. Then there is the faith borrow church. Others believe that borrowing, with faith in God's provision, is acceptable. However, there's a fine line between faith and presumption. The faith borrow church is the opposite extreme of the never borrow or debt adverse philosophy. We see that these particular extremes go in different directions. This extreme, the faith borrow philosophy, says, well, God's going to provide it all. All we need to do is just simply borrow, and God will provide. If you have enough faith, it will be okay. There's a fine line between faith and foolishness. Then there is the responsible stewardship philosophy. Other churches take a more balanced view, emphasizing the need for wise and responsible stewardship of resources. They may reference passages such as Matthew 25:14 through 30. I read that entire passage in part 1 of this particular series. It's the parable of the talents. That supports, they claim, the idea of making wise investments that grows the church's resources. These churches might borrow money, but only after careful consideration and with a clear plan for repayment. They often aim to avoid excessive debt that could burden the congregation or hinder ministry. Then there is the growth-oriented philosophy. Some churches view borrowing as a tool to support growth and expansion, especially when it comes to building projects, purchasing land, or launching new ministries. They may cite Nehemiah's rebuilding of the wall in Jerusalem, Nehemiah 2:7 through 8, as an example of using resources, even borrowed resources, to fulfill God's purposes. These churches might take on debt if they believe that it will lead to significant ministry growth or outreach opportunities. They trust that God will provide the means to repay it through increased giving or other income. Then there is the comfort zone borrowing. Comfort zone is where the borrower feels comfortable that they're able to repay it. Your church may feel comfortable with one of the philosophies that we have looked at, and you may feel uncomfortable with each of them and have a different philosophy. You will have to determine what your direction is for your church in terms of borrowing money or not borrowing money. But here are a couple of tips. Most experts recommend that your total borrowing should not exceed 25 to 30% of your annual budget. Ideally, your debt service should remain within a comfort zone of 25 to 30% of your income, meaning that your debt obligations, including principal and interest, should not consume more than 25 to 30% of your church's income. If your debt exceeds this threshold, it's critical to reassess your financial strategy. It's a strong signal to step back and reevaluate before moving forward. Churches often have different philosophies when it comes to borrowing money, and these views can vary widely depending upon their theological beliefs, financial principles, and the specific needs of the congregation. Each church's philosophy on borrowing money reflects its broader beliefs about stewardship, faith, and financial responsibility. Many churches seek a balance, borrowing only when necessary, and always with careful consideration and a strong repayment plan. On this slide, we will look at several borrowing considerations. First, there's a direct correlation between debt and freedom to minister. High debt can hinder ministry opportunities, especially if the church is unable or has a hard time meeting its financial obligations. Be careful about the hidden costs of debt. Debt limits a church's ability to fund personnel, ministry, and building maintenance. So these are some of the hidden costs involved with borrowing. You can't spend as much as you would like to on other areas. Number 3, perceived priorities correlate to borrowing enthusiasm. Congregation buy-in is critical when borrowing for any major project. The church must prioritize its needs and ensure that borrowing aligns with its long-term goals. The greater the growth rate, the greater the borrowing potential. Lenders consider a church's growth rate when assessing borrowing potential. Rapid growth can increase borrowing options, but it also increases financial risk. And then debt retirement maximum. We've mentioned this before, but I want to mention it again. 25 to 30% of your church's undesignated funds should not be exceeded when you calculate debt retirement. Exceeding this limit can strain the church's budget and hinder other ministry opportunities. The process of developing a church budget varies, but I want to share with you on this slide some common approaches and an approach that I have used. Now notice that budgeting process involves several steps. First of all, it's an annual process. I want to stress that you must budget annually, not just on an as-needed basis. Now, if you do the type of budget I'm suggesting, it's going to take about 3 months to go through the budgeting process. And notice it is a process. Second, decide on the type of budget you will develop. I would recommend you look at a zero-based budgeting process along with previous funding. You can combine these two when you're going through the budgeting process and come out with a very good document. Third, ask all leaders to be involved, all staff, all committees. You must ask everyone who is involved in ministry or who leads a committee or anyone who spends money to be involved in the process, particularly of submitting what they plan to do during the year with the cost associated with it. Then you'll want to have a dedicated team or committee to begin the process. Perhaps the finance committee or a budget committee needs to be formed and to be involved. The work group begins by drafting an initial budget for review. This draft comes from the requests that ministry leaders have submitted. It is then refined by the committee and a tentative proposal can now be put together. Once the draft budget is prepared, the Finance Committee takes the draft to key leaders in the church to review. You should take it before perhaps the deacon body or others depending upon your church's structure and polity. They will review the tentative budget and perhaps make corrections or suggestions. After incorporating any necessary changes, the final budget is then presented to the church, typically during a conference or business meeting. The congregation then votes on the budget, and they approve it, or they amend it, and they have the right of doing that if they're not satisfied with the way the budget looks. This is a good budgeting process. I recommend it to you. Refine it as you need to. Use what parts of it fit your church, but I encourage you to go through this at least annually. Securing financial commitment from church members to support the budget requires a thoughtful and strategic approach. Here are some effective methods. Conduct an annual stewardship campaign with or without pledges. An organized, focused effort can help rally the church around the budget. Nehemiah chapter 10, verses 35 through 39 outlines how the Israelites committed to providing for the needs for rebuilding the temple. Plan an annual stewardship campaign where the church sets specific giving goals and encourages members to make financial commitments for the upcoming year. This can include special services, testimonies, and events focused on generosity. I encourage you to preach and to teach biblical stewardship. Preaching on stewardship throughout January can encourage members to grow as stewards of their time, talents, and treasures. I always use the entire month of January to form a series of messages that dealt with biblical stewardship, and it was received very well. Regular preaching and teaching about biblical principles of giving emphasize that tithing and offerings are acts of worship and obedience to God is important. Passages like Malachi 3:10, which speaks about bringing the whole tithe into the storehouse, can be foundational. Offer classes on financial stewardship, helping members understand how their giving supports the church's mission and how it reflects in their relationship to God. People are more likely to give when they understand where their money is going and how it is to be used. Proverbs 29:18 says, "Where there is no vision, the people perish." Clearly articulate the church's vision, mission, and the specific needs of the budget. Share stories of how past giving has made a difference in the church and the community. Provide regular updates on the church's finances and how the funds are being used. Encourage regular planned giving. According to Paul, who gave advice in 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verse 2, he said, "Set aside a sum of money on the first day of the week." Promote regular, planned giving through options like automatic bank transfers, online giving platforms, or pledges. This helps members stay consistent in their giving and allows the church to plan its budget more effectively. Lead by example. Church leaders should model faithful giving. In 1 Chronicles chapter 29, verses 3 through 9, King David leads by example in giving to the temple, and his example inspired others to give generously. Church leaders should be transparent about their own commitment to giving and encourage others to follow suit. Public testimonies from leaders and members about the blessing of giving can also inspire others. Create a culture of generosity. A culture of generosity values generosity as a core part of discipleship. Acts chapter 4, verses 32 through 35 describes the early church sharing everything they had to meet needs. Regularly celebrate acts of generosity within the church. Have individuals share testimonies of how giving has blessed both the giver and the receiver, and highlight the impact of the church's ministry in the community. And then ongoing discipleship. Emphasize that giving is not just about funding the church, but it's about developing as a disciple of Jesus. Jesus spoke a lot about stewardship. He spoke frequently on money, possessions, and stewardship, and he used those topics to illustrate deeper spiritual truths as well. Securing financial commitment from church members is about more than just asking for money. It's about cultivating a spirit of generosity and helping members understand their giving as an essential part of their spiritual growth. Clear communication, personal engagement, and strong leadership are key to inspiring and maintaining financial support. Remember that financial giving is a part of our development as a disciple of Jesus. Stewardship is about the lordship of Jesus Christ. As we conclude this PowerPoint presentation, I hope you have gained some valuable insight into managing church finances with wisdom and faithfulness. Remember, your calling to ministry is the highest calling, and managing church finances is a crucial aspect of that calling. I encourage you to consider enrolling in Church Administration 202, where we will dive into leadership using John Maxwell's Developing the Leader Within You 2.0 as a key resource. Leadership is essential for any minister, and this course will equip you to lead with confidence and effectiveness. May God bless you as you continue to serve Him, and may He grant you wisdom in your financial decisions for His glory. This is the end of this presentation.